The greatest empires in history often left libraries filled with their stories. But what about the empires that built no libraries at all? Some of history's most dominant maritime powers controlled entire oceans and amassed incredible wealth, yet they left almost no written records for us to find. This is the central paradox we are setting out to solve. By the end of this exploration, you will understand how to read history in the silent language of shipwrecks, star charts, and spoken word. We will uncover how a kingdom can vanish from written history for 600 years, and how navigators crossed the vast Pacific using knowledge that was never written down. Their stories challenge everything we assume about how power is recorded and remembered. What does it truly mean for a civilization to be lost? Think of history as a grand library, but one where entire shelves are mysteriously empty. The catalogue says a great work should be here, yet when you reach for it, your hands close on nothing but air. This is the nature of historical silence. When we say a maritime power left almost no written records, we are not describing a simple absence. We are pointing to a profound shift in how a society chose to remember itself. For some cultures, writing simply wasn't the primary tool. They were pre-literate, transmitting laws, genealogies, and navigational secrets through epic poems and chants memorized across generations. Other societies did write, but on materials that could not survive a tropical climate or the relentless passage of centuries. Imagine accounts etched onto dried palm leaves or painted on strips of bark, materials that return to the earth within a few human lifetimes. Then there are the records that were deliberately taken from us. Conquerors throughout history have understood that to erase a people's past is to weaken their future. Libraries were burned, archives were scattered, and with them, the first-hand voices of these seafaring empires were often silenced. But as archaeologist Dr. John Terrell reminds us, this is not an absence of history. It is a different kind of history. Their archives were not made of parchment and ink. Their most important texts were written in the shape of a hull, the pattern of a woven sail, and the distribution of distinctive pottery found on shores thousands of miles apart. Their stories are encoded in the very bones of their people, revealing journeys across the ocean in genetic lineages. This silent record is everywhere, waiting for us to learn its language. To understand the powers we are about to meet, we must first stop listening for their words and start observing their world. Their world was colored by a secret, a shade so rare it became synonymous with power itself. To wear Tyrian purple was to be clothed in the wealth of an empire, a deep crimson hue extracted from countless sea snails in workshops along the Levantine coast. The Phoenicians built their entire identity on this art of the unseen. They were not conquerors of land in the traditional sense, but masters of the horizon, weaving a commercial network that stretched from the rocky shores of modern-day Lebanon to the pillars of Gibraltar and beyond. They planted colonies like seeds, with Carthage growing into a power that would one day challenge Rome itself. Yet for a civilization so profoundly connected, so central to the ancient economy, their own voice is almost entirely absent. We have no Phoenician epics, no royal chronicles, no merchant's diary detailing a voyage to a tin-rich island. Their literature, if it ever filled scrolls, has vanished. What remains are echoes and reflections. We find their marks on stone, short dedications to gods or names carved on tombs. We know them largely through the eyes of others, through the often wary accounts of Greek historians and Roman senators who saw them as formidable rivals. Their most eloquent testimony was never written down at all. It was built. It was the design of their ships, the sleek galleons that could outrun and outmaneuver nearly any other vessel on the water. These were the engines of their silent empire, floating fortresses of trade that required no written manifesto to project influence across the entire Mediterranean. This presents a fascinating puzzle. Why would a society of unparalleled merchants, the inventors of a phonetic alphabet that simplified writing for the entire Western world, choose not to record their own story? Historians point to a culture of calculated secrecy. In a world where a trade route to a source of silver or tin was worth more than a mountain of gold, knowledge was the ultimate commodity to be guarded, not published. Writing down navigational charts or lists of trading partners would have been an incredible risk. Perhaps their records were kept, but on perishable papyrus scrolls stored in port cities, vulnerable to humidity, fire, and the inevitable decay of time. The cruelest irony is that their greatest gift, their alphabet, became the tool with which Greeks and Romans wrote their own immortal histories, while the Phoenician narratives faded, written in vanishing ink on forgotten materials. So we must look for their history in other places. We trace it in the spread of their distinctive pottery and glassware, found in ruins from Cyprus to Sardinia. We see it in the coins they minted, often bearing the image of a swift ship, a symbol of their identity pressed into metal. We hear it in the very linguistic roots of words passed down through maritime tradition. Their power is not in a library's silence, but in the deep and enduring imprint they left on the world's map, a ghostly outline of trade routes that still whispers of purple dye and ships that mastered the sea by mastering the art of keeping secrets. The scent of cloves and sandalwood hung thick in the humid air of 7th century Palembang, a perfume of unimaginable wealth. On these riverbanks, under the serene gaze of towering Buddhist statues, merchants from China, India, and Arabia bartered for gold and fragrant resins, their languages weaving a tapestry of commerce. This was the heart of the Srivijaya Empire, a phantom kingdom that for over 5 centuries commanded the most valuable waterways on Earth, the Malacca and Sunda Straits. To control these narrow passages was to hold the key to all trade between China and the Indian Ocean, a position of power that should have made Srivijaya immortal in historical record. Yet this maritime giant did something astonishing. It vanished from the written world for nearly 600 years. Its name was whispered in a few travel diaries, like those of the Chinese pilgrim Yijing, who stopped there in the 7th century on his way to study in India, and then it was gone, swallowed by the jungle and the silence of time. For centuries, historians debated whether Srivijaya was even a real empire or just a mythical place mentioned in old texts. The proof of its existence lay buried, not under stone, but in the deep, wet mud of the Musi River. Recent archaeological dives have pulled astonishing artifacts from the silt, golden rings, intricate jewelry, and statues of Buddha, all perfectly preserved in the oxygen-poor environment. These are not the remains of a lost city, but of a bustling, floating port that literally sank into history. The empire's silence is a direct result of its environment and its choices. Its scribes likely recorded laws, treaties, and trade logs on palm leaves or tree bark, the common materials of Southeast Asia. In a tropical climate, such archives were doomed to dissolve back into the earth within a generation or two, leaving no paper trail for historians to follow. Furthermore, Srivijaya was a thalassocracy, a realm defined by water, not land. Its power was fluid, based on controlling strategic choke points and forming alliances with coastal settlements, rather than on conquering and administering vast inland territories. This model leaves behind few of the stone palaces, carved monuments, or fortified walls we associate with ancient empires. Its monuments were its ports, its palaces were the great trading ships that filled its harbors, and its legacy was written not on parchment, but in the cultural and political DNA of the Southeast Asian world that followed. This phantom kingdom, rediscovered through mud and mystery, shows us that an empire can be everywhere and nowhere at once. its influence echoing for a millennium even while its own story was written on leaves that the rain washed away. Granite endures in a way that paper and wood simply cannot. In the city of Thanjavur, a temple tower soars over 200 feet into the sky, every inch of its surface a testament in stone to the power of the Chola kings. Carved with meticulous detail, these structures were meant to last for eternity, proclaiming divine favor and earthly dominion to all who saw them. Yet this obsession with permanent, land-based glory creates one of history's most puzzling contrasts. In the early 11th century, the Chola dynasty under Rajaraja I and his son Rajendra I launched some of the most ambitious naval expeditions the Indian Ocean had ever seen. Their fleets, numbering hundreds of ships, sailed south to conquer parts of Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and then turned east, striking across the Bay of Bengal to the very ports of the Srivijaya Empire. They projected power over thousands of miles of ocean, and of their navy's daily reality we have almost nothing. No admiral's personal journal describing the swell of the sea. No ship's manifest listing the crew and cargo. No detailed logs charting the winds and currents that carried their armies to victory. The silence of their maritime records is deafening, especially when set against the thunderous, permanent proclamations carved in temple stone. We know of their exploits only from the land looking out. Grandiose inscriptions on temple walls celebrate these campaigns as glorious deeds, but they are poetry, not paperwork. They speak of kings receiving tribute from conquered lands, not of the logistics of keeping a fleet supplied at sea for months. This was a culture that recorded the most minute details of temple grants and land transactions on durable copper plates, preserving economic life with bureaucratic care. So why would they not do the same for their navy? Historians suggest a fascinating cultural lens. For the Chola elite, deeply rooted in agrarian and temple-centered traditions, these naval campaigns might have been seen as spectacular but episodic events. They were sources of immense prestige, wealth, and proof of the king's cosmic role, but not necessarily the core of a bureaucratic state that needed to be managed on paper. The ocean was a realm of conquest, not administration. The glory was in the result, the tribute brought home, not in the mundane record of the journey itself. This forces us to become detectives in the negative space. To map the Chola maritime reach, we must piece together clues from panegyric poems, scattered references in foreign chronicles from places like China and Srivijaya, and the subtle evidence of trade goods and cultural influence found across Southeast Asia. Their naval power was real, vast, and transformative, yet its story is written in whispers on the wind, while their prayers are shouted for eternity in granite. The vast Pacific is not an empty expanse but a charted highway, its maps written in the stars and memorized by heart. For over 1,000 years, the Tonga Empire wove a sacred kinship network across islands from Fiji to Samoa, ruling an oceanic realm without borders, without written treaties, and without a single permanent archive of paper. Their authority sailed on the twin hulls of a voyaging canoe, guided by navigators who could read the subtle signatures of swells, the flight patterns of birds, and the unwavering paths of constellations. This was an empire of memory, where history was not stored in a vault but performed in ceremony and recited in chants that could last for hours. The living libraries of this civilization were the talking chiefs, or matapule, individuals trained from childhood to hold the empire's most vital knowledge. They memorized elaborate genealogies that connected living rulers directly to the gods, listing hundreds of names in unbroken sequence. They held the protocols for sacred ceremonies, the boundaries of fishing grounds, and the histories of great voyages. To lose a talking chief was not merely to lose a person, it was to risk losing a chapter of the world itself. Power was maintained through a web of sacred obligation and prestigious exchange. At the center was the kava ceremony, a ritual where a drink made from the root of the pepper plant was shared in a strict order of precedence. Who drank first, who served, and who prepared the bowl was a living map of the entire social and political order, performed again and again to reinforce its truth. Tribute flowed not just as food or resources, but as objects of profound cultural value, like bundles of precious red feathers, which symbolized divine connection and chiefly status. Control over the sources and distribution of such goods cemented the Tuʻi Tonga's central role in a vast gift economy. So how does a political order this complex function for a millennium without written laws or decrees? The answer lies in the integration of knowledge into the very fabric of life. The star charts for navigation were not separate from the genealogies, they were part of the same epic chant. The myth of a founding ancestor was also the story that explained a current political alliance. This system was incredibly resilient and adaptable, but its fragility is also obvious. When European contact brought new diseases and profound social change, the chain of oral transmission was severely strained. Some chants were lost forever, taking with them unique perspectives on history, ecology, and navigation. The Tuʻi Tonga case shows us that writing is not the only path to sophistication. A complex empire can be sustained by performative memory, where every ceremony is a reaffirmation of the constitution, and every navigator is a keeper of the map. Their records were written in the relationships between people, in the patterns of the waves, and in the names of the stars, a library as vast as the ocean they called home. Stone arches and intricate coral carvings rise from the island of Kilwakisiwani, a silent city built from the sea itself. These structures are the physical ledger of a different kind of empire, a string of independent city-states that dotted the Swahili coast from Somalia to Mozambique. For centuries, places like Mogadishu, Mombasa, and Kilwa were not just ports, they were cosmopolitan crossroads where African, Arab, Persian, and Indian cultures blended into something entirely new. Their wealth was legendary, flowing from the interior in the form of gold, ivory, and exotic woods, exchanged for silks, spices, and porcelain from across the Indian Ocean. They were literate societies using Arabic script and leaving behind some chronicles and inscriptions on tombs. Yet if we search for the heartbeat of their economy, the daily pulse of deals and agreements, we find another profound silence. The vast archives of commercial records, the contracts between a Kilwa merchant and his partner in Gujarat, the ship manifests, the accounts of taxes paid on ivory tusks have almost entirely vanished. This leaves a glaring gap in our understanding. How did these sophisticated trading hubs, engines of global commerce, function with what appears to be a missing paper trail? The reasons are woven into their environment and their practices. While important religious texts or royal proclamations might be carefully preserved, the mundane paperwork of business was likely written on paper or parchment in the coastal humidity, a climate that acts as a slow, relentless eraser. Furthermore, the culture of trade often relied on trusted personal relationships and oral agreements reinforced by community reputation and shared legal traditions. A merchant's word, backed by the collective memory of the trading quarter, could be as binding as any written contract. It is also highly probable that a great deal of administrative writing was done in Arabic on materials that simply succumbed to time, leaving the stone buildings to stand as mute witnesses to the commerce that built them. So we must read their history in other ways. We read it in the very language of the coast, Swahili, a Bantu language richly layered with Arabic loanwords, a living testament to 1,000 years of cultural exchange. We read it in the archaeology of these stone towns, where Chinese porcelain fragments are found alongside local pottery, and in the design of the grand houses, which blended African spatial layouts with ornate Middle Eastern decorative motifs. Their legacy is not in a filed ledger but in a living culture and a coastline that still whispers the story of the monsoon winds, connecting continents through trade long before the modern world drew its maps. A gilded lion stares silently from a stone pillar, its mouth holding a slot for secrets. Venice, the serene republic, presents history with a fascinating paradox. We have its tax ledgers, its marriage contracts, its grand chronicles of art and architecture. Yet for all this documentation, the true mechanisms of its power operated in shadows no parchment could fully capture. This was a state that mastered the art of selective silence, cultivating an aura of impenetrable mystery as a tool of governance. While other empires vanished leaving no records, Venice flourished by creating two parallel archives, one for the world to see and another, far more secretive, designed to protect its advantage. The heart of this system was the Council of Ten and its feared state inquisitors. In the Doge's palace, behind doors closed to all but a select few, matters of supreme state security were debated. These discussions were never minuted. No official record was kept of who said what, ensuring absolute deniability and freeing the council to make ruthless decisions in the interest of the Republic. What was written down often took a coded form. The Venetian cipher service became legendary, developing sophisticated encryption to protect diplomatic correspondence about alliances, trade deals, and intelligence on rivals. A letter intercepted by Milan or the Ottoman Empire would reveal only gibberish, a written record that was deliberately made unreadable. This culture of secrecy extended to the very routes of its wealth. While the Silk Road is famous on maps, the specific deals made with caravan masters, the bribes paid to local governors to secure safe passage, and the true profit margins on spices and silk were closely guarded secrets of the merchant families and the state bodies that regulated them. To share such knowledge would be to surrender competitive edge, so we are left with a profound realization. For some maritime powers, the absence of a public record is not an accident of history or a limitation of their culture. It is the point. Venice reminds us that silence can be a strategic, deliberate choice. A state mystery is maintained to unnerve rivals, to protect methods, and to preserve a power structure that thrives on information asymmetry. Their written records exist, but they are like the visible portion of a great iceberg, hinting at the vast, submerged bulk of unwritten understandings, whispered agreements, and secrets that sailed with every galley leaving the lagoon, forever lost to the confidential tides of state. A library can burn, but a song remembered by 100 people cannot be so easily erased. This is the profound strength of oral tradition, a system of memory so sophisticated and dynamic that it challenges our deep-seated belief in the supremacy of the written word. For maritime cultures whose world was defined by fluid horizons and shifting winds, a fixed text carved in stone or penned on parchment could become a dangerous relic, obsolete with the next change of the monsoon. Their solution was to build living archives that could adapt and travel with them. Consider the Polynesian master navigator sitting in the hull of his voyaging canoe. He did not consult a map. Instead, he recited a chant, a long, rhythmic poem that was also a precise navigational chart. Each stanza encoded the rising and setting positions of key stars for a specific segment of the ocean. The chant, named Ocean Swells, described the flight patterns of birds that indicated nearby land and listed the sequence of islands to be sighted. This was not a vague story. It was a technical manual passed from teacher to student over years of rigorous training, a system of knowledge where accuracy was a matter of life and death for an entire community. Similarly, along the Swahili coast, the history of a town, the clauses of a trade agreement, or the boundaries of a fishing ground might be held in the memory of a respected elder or performed in a public poetic form called utenzi. These were not casual recollections. Scholars of oral history note that such traditions often contain built-in checks and balances. The narrative is performed in a social setting where other knowledge keepers are present. Any significant deviation or error could be challenged on the spot by the community, which acts as a collective guardian of the true account. The structure itself, with its rhythmic patterns, formulaic phrases, and melodic contours, serves as a mnemonic framework, making the information easier to memorize accurately and harder to corrupt accidentally. This transforms our understanding of orality. It is not a primitive absence of writing, but a deliberate and highly evolved technology for preserving what matters most in a world of constant motion. A ship's design could be encoded in a carpenter's chant. A legal code could be embedded in proverbs recited at community gatherings. A trade treaty with a distant port could be remembered as a story of friendship between ancestors. These systems were resilient because they were distributed, held in many minds instead of a single vulnerable scroll. They were adaptable because a skilled knowledge keeper could, within the accepted framework, subtly update a chant to reflect a new trade relationship or a newly discovered current, ensuring the information remained vital and relevant. In a world written in water, they chose a record that could flow. The silt of centuries parts under a careful hand, revealing not gold or jewels, but the curved shoulder of a clay jar. Resting on the dark seabed, this amphora is a sentence in a language no one ever wrote. It is archaeology that becomes our decoder ring, transforming silent objects into loud narratives of forgotten voyages. When written records are absent or deliberately destroyed, the sea itself often preserves the most honest testimony. Sunken ships are frozen moments in time, their cargo holds filled with the raw data of global exchange, waiting for us to learn how to read them. Take the Uluburan shipwreck discovered off the coast of Turkey. This late Bronze Age vessel, from a time when empires like the Hittites and Egyptians communicated on clay tablets, sank carrying a floating inventory of the ancient Mediterranean world. Its hold was a cosmopolitan marketplace with copper ingots from Cyprus, tin possibly from Anatolia, ebony from Africa, and Canaanite jars filled with resin. There were Baltic amber and Egyptian scarabs, all on a single ship. No written manifest survives, but the cargo itself maps the political and economic alliances of the era with stunning clarity. The very presence of these goods together suggests a network of gift exchange and royal trade between powerful kingdoms, a silent accord written in commodities. Half a world away, in the Java Sea, the Belitung shipwreck tells a parallel story from a different age. This is a 9th century Arab How, its hull filled with the dazzling ceramic output of Tang Dynasty China. Tens of thousands of bowls, dishes, and exquisite ewers, many decorated with cobalt blue from Persia, were packed for a market in the Middle East. This single wreck provides irrefutable, physical proof of a direct maritime silk route between China and the Abbasid Caliphate, a route hinted at in texts but dramatically confirmed by this silent cargo. It rewrites our understanding of the speed and scale of globalization in the medieval world, but the stories go far beyond a list of items. Archaeologists are detectives of the mundane, finding narrative in the smallest details. The type of stone used for ballast can reveal where a ship last repaired its hull. Analysis of preserved food remains, like olive pits or fish bones, opens a window into the diet and daily life of the crew. The construction technique of the hull itself, whether it uses pegged mortise and tenon joints or lashed lashings, speaks volumes about the shipwright's cultural tradition and the technological exchanges happening in busy ports. Each wreck is a sealed time capsule, an accidental snapshot of a moment in transit. There is no bias, no royal propaganda, no scribe's editorial hand. The cargo is simply what was valuable enough to ship. By comparing wrecks from different eras, we can see trade routes evolve, certain goods rise and fall in popularity, and the shifting centers of maritime power. A concentration of Roman amphorae off the coast of India paints a picture of monsoon-driven trade. The scattered remains of a Spanish galleon in the Caribbean charts the brutal reality of the Atlantic crossing. These silent witnesses on the ocean floor force historians to think differently. Instead of reading words, they read weights, measures, materials, and distributions. They reconstruct networks of exchange and influence from the physical movement of objects. The amphora, the ingot, and the humble storage jar become the primary sources, telling a story of connection, ambition, and sometimes of a journey that ended abruptly on the seafloor, preserving its secrets for 1,000 years. A name can be a ghost of a forgotten voyage. Listen closely to the names scattered across the islands of the Pacific and the shores of the Indian Ocean. Words like Honolulu or Fiji are not just labels on a map. They are linguistic fossils, carrying within them the echoes of the people who first named these places and the journeys that brought them there. When written records vanish, language itself becomes an archaeological site, and the study of place names, toponymy, gives us a shovel. We can trace the reach of invisible maritime empires by following the trail of the words they left behind. The most staggering example is not written in any chronicle, but spoken in the tongues of hundreds of millions of people. It is the Austronesian language family. Today, languages as diverse as Malagasy in Madagascar, Malay in Indonesia, Tagalog in the Philippines, and Maori in New Zealand are all linguistic cousins. They share a common ancestral language that was carried not by armies marching over land, but by families sailing in outrigger canoes. This linguistic footprint is the single greatest evidence for a prehistoric maritime expansion of breathtaking scale. Starting from Taiwan around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, these seafaring communities island-hopped through Southeast Asia, across the vast open Pacific to reach the most remote islands like Rapa Nui, and even sailed west across the entire Indian Ocean to settle Madagascar. They left no written accounts of these epic voyages, no ship's logs of crossing thousands of miles of open ocean. Yet their success is recorded irrevocably in the very words their descendants use for boat, for sea, for home. The map of where Austronesian languages are spoken is in effect a map of their ancient maritime empire, drawn not in ink but in speech. This linguistic evidence works like a compass for later periods as well. On the island of Madagascar, off the coast of Africa, the native language Malagasy is fundamentally Austronesian, but woven into its vocabulary are clear and abundant loanwords from Malay and Javanese, languages from islands thousands of miles away across the Indian Ocean. This is not a coincidence. It is the linguistic signature of sustained trade contact, likely between Malay sailors and the earlier Austronesian settlers of Madagascar, a conversation between seafarers that left its mark in everyday words. Similarly, in the port cities of ancient Southeast Asia, linguists find the subtle imprint of Tamil, the language of southern India's powerful Chola dynasty and its merchant guilds. Words related to trade, administration, and even religious concepts filtered into local languages, marking the routes of Indian merchants and the cultural influence that sailed with their goods. Decoding these layers is like peeling back the pages of a lost logbook. A place name ending in a certain suffix might indicate it was once a Chola trading outpost. A shared word for a specific type of sail or hull design across two distant cultures suggests a transfer of technology, a moment where one group of sailors learned from another. These are the silent charts of ancient sailors, preserved not on parchment, but in the living, evolving language of the places they touched. They tell us that an empire's true borders were not always marked by soldiers or forts, but by the distance its words could travel on the wind, taking root in new soil and whispering their origin stories for generations to come. Deep within the labyrinthine halls of the Palace of Knossos, dolphins leap across walls in brilliant blues, frozen in a moment of eternal grace. This was the world of the Minoans, a civilization so advanced and artistically vibrant that it feels almost modern, and yet their most basic thoughts are locked away from us. They left behind thousands of clay tablets inscribed with their script, Linear A flowing series of symbols that has stubbornly resisted every attempt at translation for over a century. Here, the historical silence takes a uniquely frustrating form. The records physically exist, meticulously baked by the fire that destroyed the palace, preserving lists of goods, people, and places. We can hold their archive in our hands, but we cannot read a single word. This means we hear the Minoans only through the artifacts they made and the impressions they left on others. Their sprawling palace complexes, with their ingenious plumbing and light wells, suggest a society focused on commerce, ceremony, and the sea. The absence of fortifications on early Crete has led many historians to propose they were a thalassocracy, a maritime empire that derived power from its fleet and trade networks, not from walled citadels. Their influence is painted across the Aegean. Distinctive Minoan pottery, with its elegant octopus and spiral designs, appears on islands like Thera and the coasts of mainland Greece, marking the routes of their ships. Their artistic style, full of fluid naturalism, profoundly shaped the later Mycenaean Greeks who would occupy their palaces. This cultural shadow may even stretch into myth. The Greek philosopher Plato, writing over 1,000 years later, told the story of a great island kingdom called Atlantis, a sophisticated naval power that ruled the sea from a magnificent palace, only to vanish in a single day and night. While Atlantis is a philosophical allegory, many scholars wonder if its origins lie in a garbled memory of Minoan Crete, a tale passed down through generations of a dazzling maritime society that was indeed devastated, perhaps by the colossal volcanic eruption on Thera and the tsunamis that followed. The Minoan enigma is a double silence. We have their words, but they are mute. We have evidence of their ships, but no logs of their voyages. Their story is told in the silent language of a dolphin fresco, in the spread of a pottery style, and in the haunting myth of a lost island, a ghostly imprint on history that challenges us to understand an empire we can see so clearly, but whose voice we may never hear. The walls of Medinet Habu tell a story of fire and desperation, carved in stone by the victors. In the twilight of the Bronze Age, around 1200 before the Common Era, the eastern Mediterranean world shuddered and fell. The grand palaces of the Hittites burned to the ground. The bustling ports of Ugarit sent frantic, unanswered pleas for help. Mycenaean Greece descended into a dark age. And surging against the shores of Egypt came a force the pharaoh's scribes could only describe with a chillingly vague term: the Sea Peoples. We know them only through the terrified eyes of those who barely survived them. The Egyptian records at Medinet Habu and elsewhere are our sole written source, depicting these invaders in fierce naval battles, their families traveling in ox carts, a whole people on the move. They name specific groups, the Peleset, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, but offer no map of their homeland. To the Egyptians, they were a faceless storm from the sea, a calamity that nearly broke the world. And then they vanished from history as mysteriously as they arrived, leaving not a single line of their own story behind. So who were they? With no archives of their own, historians and archaeologists become detectives at a crime scene where the perpetrators left only scattered, ambiguous clues. The evidence is in the pottery shards and the shapes of swords. Distinctive styles of pottery, like the handmade, barbarian ware found in the ruins of coastal Canaanite cities, don't match local styles. Their forms and decorations point north toward the Aegean and Anatolia. Similarly, certain types of swords and armor uncovered in the region bear a striking resemblance to those used by the warrior cultures of the central Mediterranean. This material evidence suggests the Sea Peoples were not a single nation, but a confederation of disparate groups from the crumbling edges of the Bronze Age world, perhaps from modern-day Greece, Turkey, Sardinia, and Sicily, thrown together by a common crisis. What could have set this catastrophic migration in motion? Scholars propose a perfect storm of hardships. Tree ring data and other climate records indicate a prolonged period of severe drought and crop failures across the region during this exact century. This environmental stress, combined with possible earthquakes and the internal instability of the great empires, may have pushed entire populations from their homes in search of new land. Were they climate refugees desperate for survival, or were they opportunistic pirates seeing weakness in the old powers and striking for plunder? The truth likely lies in a terrible combination of both. Their impact, however, is undeniable. They did not just raid, they settled. The Peliset, for instance, are widely identified with the Philistines of the Bible, who established a powerful presence on the coast of Canaan. Their arrival permanently redrew the political and cultural map of the region, helping to end the age of monolithic empires and ushering in a new, fragmented world of smaller kingdoms and city-states. Their profound historical influence is matched only by their profound anonymity. They were the ultimate disruptors, recorded not by their own poets, but by the terrified scribes of the civilizations they helped topple. In their silence, they offer a haunting lesson that history is often written by those left standing in the ruins, and the story of the storm is never told by the wind. A longship cuts through the frigid spray, its dragon-head prow aimed at a horizon where maps end and myth begins. The Norse explorers of the Viking Age were masters of this unforgiving sea, settling the remote shores of Iceland and Greenland, and even making landfall on the continent of North America, centuries before Columbus. Theirs was a maritime empire built on audacity and shipcraft, yet from the height of their expansion, they left us almost no written account of why they sailed or what they saw. This silence is one of history's most intriguing puzzles, because we do have their stories, just not from when they happened. The great Icelandic sagas, filled with vivid tales of these very voyages, were written down on parchment 200 to 300 years after the events they describe. They are a shimmering, beautiful mirage, reflecting a truth but filtered through the haze of time and oral tradition. To understand the Norse, we must learn to read the gap between the saga's epic poetry and the runestone's stark silence. During the Viking Age itself, Norse culture was profoundly oral. Laws, histories, and navigational knowledge were held in memory, recited in halls by skalds whose poetic skill was a valued art. Writing existed in the form of runes, but these angular characters were carved for specific, practical purposes. The rune stones that dot the Scandinavian landscape are overwhelmingly memorials, raised to honor the dead, not to chronicle exploration. A typical inscription might proudly state, "Gunnar raised this stone in memory of Bjorn, his brother, a good sailor." It confirms a culture of seafaring, but tells us nothing of where Bjorn sailed or what he found. Any more detailed records, perhaps temporary tallies of supplies or maps sketched on treated leather, have simply perished in the northern climate, leaving no trace. So we turn from the written word to the physical evidence, where the story becomes astonishingly clear. The Oseberg ship burial in Norway is a perfect example. Here, an entire, graceful longship was buried as a tomb for a powerful woman, its hull filled with an array of grave goods from sledges to tapestries. The ship itself is the document, its sleek, flexible design with a shallow draft for river travel and a strong sail for open ocean is the real secret of Norse expansion. It was a vessel that could raid up the Seine one season and cross the Atlantic the next. Further west, the silent, windswept ruins of Norse farms in Greenland speak volumes. The stone foundations of homesteads at Brattahlid, the remains of a bishop's church, and even fragments of wool cloth analyzed by scientists tell a story of a sustained, adapted settlement that lasted for centuries, a community living on the very edge of the known world. And then there is the faint, tantalizing signature at the very edge of their reach. At Elant's Ox Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland, archaeologists uncovered the unmistakable footprint of a Norse settlement, several sod-walled buildings and a small iron smithy. This is not a saga, it is a fact on the ground, proving unequivocally that Norse sailors did indeed reach North America around the year 1000. Yet the site was small and used only for a short period, a base for exploration rather than a colony. It matches the saga descriptions of a place called Vinland, a land of wild grapes and timber, but it raises more questions than it answers. Why did they not stay? The sagas speak of conflict with the local inhabitants, which archaeology hints at with a single, small artifact, a Norse spindle whorl found at an indigenous site hundreds of miles away, suggesting some form of distant contact, perhaps trade. This brings us back to the sagas themselves, written in the Christian era of a settled Iceland. Are they history or literature? The answer is both. They are like a family story passed down for generations, where the core events are real, but the details, dialogues, and motivations are shaped by the tellers. A saga might accurately recall that a settler named Eric the Red founded a farm in a certain fjord in Greenland, a fact supported by archaeology. But the dramatic dialogue between Eric and his son Leif about sailing west is likely a later embellishment, a narrative device to explain the discovery. The sagas are our guide, but not our gospel. They point us to the truths we can then seek in the soil and in the ship's design. The Norse maritime achievement, therefore, is a collaboration between two kinds of records, the later, glorious story and the earlier, silent object. One gives us the human ambition, the other provides the physical proof. Together, they reveal a people who wrote their greatest adventures not on parchment, but on the waves, trusting their deeds to the memory of the sea and the stories of their descendants. A stone ship sails forever on a temple wall, frozen in a relief at the magnificent Borobudur. This detailed carving from the 8th century is a promise of what was to come, a prophecy in rock of a maritime destiny. Centuries later, that promise reached its zenith with the Majapahit Empire, a Javanese kingdom that in the 1400s controlled a network of ports and tributaries across much of the Indonesian archipelago. We know of its golden age primarily through two extraordinary, yet profoundly different sources. The first is a poem, the Nagarakatagama, written in 1365 by a Buddhist court poet named Prapanka, is a stunning panegyric, a work of art meant to glorify the king and his realm. It describes a royal tour, listing the countless territories that paid homage to Majapahit, from Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula to the Spice Islands of the east. It paints a picture of a unified maritime sphere under Javanese hegemony, a realm of immense wealth and cultural sophistication. The second source is the earth itself. Across the islands, archaeologists find a consistent trail of material evidence, a scattering of Majapahit-era statues, distinctive terracotta pottery, and most tellingly, vast quantities of Chinese ceramics, particularly celadon ware and blue and white porcelain from the Ming Dynasty. These fragments are the physical receipts of trade, proof that goods were flowing through Majapahit's ports and into its sphere of influence. Yet between the glorious poem and the scattered pottery shards lies a vast and telling silence. Where are the empire's tax rolls, its treaties with rival ports, its admiralty reports, or the logs of the merchant vessels that were the lifeblood of its power? The absence of a dense bureaucratic paper trail is not an accident. It is a clue to the very nature of Majapahit's rule. This was likely a thalassocracy, a maritime hegemony. Its control was not exercised through a centralized bureaucracy planting governors in every port, but through a complex web of personal loyalty, strategic marriage alliances, and the compelling power of prestige. Local rulers in places like Bali or coastal Sumatra would swear allegiance to the Majapahit king, sending tribute in exchange for protection, trade privileges, and the elevated status that came with association with the most powerful court in the region. This system of indirect rule generates far fewer daily administrative documents than a tightly controlled territorial empire. The state's memory was kept in the court, in the oral agreements between kings and envoys, and in the performance of loyalty through ritual and gift-giving. The Nagarakatagama itself is less a historical document and more a ceremonial object, a performed truth designed to reinforce this very web of relationships by proclaiming its existence. So how do we move from the poem's boastful catalogue to a real understanding of daily life? We look to the art and the artifacts, the stunning reliefs at temples like Panataran, showing scenes of royal life and mythology, tell us about societal values and aesthetics. The distribution of those specific Chinese ceramics acts like a data set, mapping the intensity of trade connections and the reach of Majapahit's economic pull. A concentration of 14th century Javanese gold rings in a Sumatran port town speaks of elite exchange and diplomatic gifts. This silent evidence reveals an empire whose strength was cultural and commercial, its authority flowing along the same sea lanes as its spices and silks. Its eventual decline and fragmentation, hastened by internal conflict and the rise of powerful Islamic sultanates, led to the dispersal of its courtly traditions and the loss of whatever fragile administrative records may have existed. Yet, in a powerful twist, Majapahit never truly vanished. Its silence in the colonial era was broken in the 20th century, when Indonesian nationalists resurrected the empire as a potent symbol of a unified archipelago that predated European rule. The Nagarakatagama was translated and celebrated as proof of a glorious indigenous past. Majapahit became a foundational myth for a modern nation, its imagined borders providing a historical precedent for the boundaries of Indonesia. Thus, the empire achieved a second life, its maritime dominance remembered not through its own ledgers, but through later longing, its stone ships forever sailing in the service of a new dream. A navigator's chart was not meant for a library shelf. This simple truth unlocks a powerful way to understand the silence we have been exploring. We must separate two very different kinds of knowledge, what we might call practical literacy and historical literacy. Many of the greatest maritime cultures possessed the first in abundance, but had little use for the second. Practical literacy is the writing and recording done for immediate, functional purposes. It is the star chart memorized as a chant to guide a canoe. It is the wind diagram scratched in the sand to teach an apprentice. It is the tally stick notched to track jars of olive oil in a ship's hold, or the unique seal pressed into clay to mark ownership of a cargo. These were vital documents, but they were ephemeral by design, tools for a specific task that lost their meaning once the voyage ended or the goods were sold. Historical literacy, by contrast, is the conscious act of recording events for an audience beyond the present moment, to inform a future that cannot be asked questions. It is the chronicle, the archive, the royal biography meant to proclaim glory for centuries. The societies we have met were masters of the practical. A Polynesian stick chart is a genius-level document of oceanography, constructed from thin sticks and cowrie shells to map the interaction of swells and currents around specific islands. To its creator, it was a perfect functional tool, a three-dimensional diagram of the sea's behavior, but it contains no king's name, no date of a great battle, no myth of origin. It answers the question, how do we get there, not who are we? Similarly, a Phoenician merchant might use marks on a wax tablet to calculate a profit, but he felt no compelling need to write down the story of his life or the history of his city. His legacy was the profit itself, reinvested in the next ship, the next voyage. This framework dissolves the paradox. It explains how a society can be profoundly sophisticated, navigating vast oceans and managing complex economies, while leaving almost no narrative history behind. They were writing the operating manual for their world, not its biography. Their documents were meant to be used until worn out, not preserved, so our goal as detectives shifts dramatically. We stop lamenting the missing history books and start learning to read the instruction manuals. We study the wear patterns on a ceramic jug that reveal it was a standard liquid measure. We analyze the lead ingots from a shipwreck, stamped with a mark that signifies a specific mining operation, a form of practical writing in metal. We decipher the knot language of the Inca quipu, a system of codes used for accounting and census data across a vast empire, yet another non-narrative form of record-keeping. These are the true texts of these maritime powers. They tell us what they valued enough to measure, to track, to map with exquisite precision. They reveal a mind focused on the tangible challenges of wind, current, commodity, and exchange. In their silence about kings and conquests, they speak volumes about the daily genius required to bind a world together by sea, using a literacy that was written in the language of the voyage itself. That silent library we spoke of earlier, its empty shelves were not always an accident. Sometimes those shelves were deliberately cleared. When European colonial powers began their expansion across the globe, they encountered sophisticated maritime societies with their own deep knowledge of the oceans. To consolidate control, many colonizers engaged in a systematic suppression of these native knowledge systems. The detailed star charts memorized by Polynesian navigators, the complex canoe-building traditions of the Caribbean's Taino people, the seasonal fishing lore of coastal African communities. These were often dismissed as primitive superstition or, worse, actively eradicated to break the cultural backbone of a people and impose a new order. The written historical record that survived this period is overwhelmingly the victor's record, a narrative that frequently justified conquest by portraying indigenous societies as peoples without history, and therefore without claim to their lands or waters. This creates a specific and painful kind of silence, where the absence of records is not a cultural choice or an environmental loss, but an act of power. It is a silence that was enforced. For generations, this skewed the historical understanding of places like the Pacific. The incredible fact that Polynesians settled islands scattered across millions of square miles of ocean was sometimes attributed to mere accident, to rafts drifting helplessly on currents, because the colonial perspective could not conceive of a deliberate, sophisticated science of navigation that required no compass or written chart. The true scope of pre-Columbian Caribbean trade and travel, hinted at by the spread of artifacts between islands, was minimized because the societies Europeans encountered did not fit a narrow, Eurocentric definition of a civilized maritime power. Recognizing this deliberate erasure is crucial because it reframes the entire mystery. When we ask why a maritime tradition left no written records, we must also ask, were those records allowed to survive? The recovery of these silenced voices is now a central mission of post-colonial archaeology and anthropology. Scholars are working collaboratively with indigenous communities, treating oral histories not as myth, but as valid historical data that can be cross-referenced with new scientific techniques. For example, linguistic analysis is reconstructing ancient trade routes by tracing the spread of words for specific canoe parts or fishing techniques across island groups. Archaeologists are using geochemical sourcing to track the movement of stone adzes across the Pacific, proving the intentional, two-way voyages that oral traditions have always described. This work is a form of historical justice, piecing together a fragmented library. It reminds us that the loudest voices in history are not always the most knowledgeable, and that the quietest traditions often hold the deepest understanding of their world. The journey to hear them again begins by understanding why they were forced to be silent in the first place. The Roman admiral's report to the emperor was a formal document, filed away in an archive for future administrators to consult. At the very same moment, a Srivijayan harbour master might have concluded an equally complex deal using nothing more than a spoken agreement and a handshake. This stark contrast forces us to ask a vital question. Why did some major maritime cultures like the Romans, the Imperial Chinese, and the medieval Arabs produce mountains of written records about their sea trade, while the powers we have explored did not? The answer lies not in intelligence or sophistication, but in the fundamental architecture of their societies. The first and most practical factor is the very material of memory. The Romans wrote on papyrus and parchment, materials that could survive for centuries in the dry climates of the Mediterranean. The Chinese perfected paper and ink, creating a durable medium for meticulous bureaucratic records. Contrast this with the environments of Southeast Asia or the Pacific, where the primary writing surfaces were palm leaves, tree bark, or bamboo strips. In a humid, tropical climate, these organic materials were lucky to last a few decades before succumbing to mold, insects, or simple decay. The archive was inherently biodegradable. Beyond the medium, we must look at the structure of the state itself. The Roman Empire and Imperial China were hyper-centralized, tax-based bureaucracies. Their survival depended on knowing exactly what was produced, shipped, and owed. This generated an immense paperwork machine, logs of grain shipments from Egypt, customs duties from Syrian ports, and reports from naval patrols. Writing was the glue that held a vast territorial empire together across thousands of miles. Now, consider the Phoenician network or the Srivijayan thalassocracy. These were not centralized states administering provinces. They were fluid, network-oriented leagues. Power was based on controlling strategic points and maintaining a web of alliances with local rulers. This model required trust, personal relationships, and adaptable agreements, not standardized tax forms. A complex deal could be cemented with a ceremonial gift and a feast, its terms remembered by the elders of the trading community. Writing it down might even be seen as a sign of distrust or a dangerous liability if the document fell into a rival's hands. Religious doctrine also played a powerful role in motivating record-keeping. In the Islamic world, which produced brilliant geographers and meticulous travelogues like those of Ibn Battuta, religious law provided a strong incentive to write. Islamic trade law, rooted in the Quran and Hadith, required clear contracts, defined partnerships, and recorded testimonies to ensure fair and lawful commerce. This created a culture where merchants were accustomed to documenting transactions, not just for practical reasons, but as a religious duty. This scriptural encouragement for writing helped preserve a rich corpus of Arabic maritime literature. Finally, we must consider the core economic model. A tax-based empire needs records to function. A trade-based network, however, often thrives on calculated ambiguity and operational secrecy. For a Venetian merchant or a Phoenician ship captain, a trade route to a source of spices or tin was a proprietary secret, a form of intellectual capital more valuable than the cargo itself. Broadcasting that knowledge in a written log, which could be stolen or copied, would be commercial suicide. In these contexts, silence was a strategic asset. This comparative view is illuminating. It shows that the absence of written records is frequently a signature of a specific kind of power, one that is flexible, decentralized, and built on networks and relationships rather than on rigid bureaucracy. It is the difference between a stone fortress and a fleet of ships. One is fixed and announces its presence loudly. The other is mobile, adaptable, and often prefers to move in silence. The written archive correlates with the empire of land and tax. The oral tradition aligns with the empire of the sea and the deal. One is not superior to the other. They are simply different solutions to the challenge of projecting influence across the water, each leaving its own distinct mark, or lack thereof, on the pages of history. A dragon guards the entrance to the Colchian kingdom, its teeth sprouting into an army of warriors. This is the world of myth where history wears a mask of the fantastic. For cultures that did not keep written chronicles, the epic tale became the primary vessel for memory, a way to carry the essence of true events across generations, even if the details transformed into something magical. These are not lies, but a different kind of truth, compressed and encoded for easier transmission. When we listen to them not as fairy tales, but as distorted reflections, we can begin to extract astonishing historical kernels. Take the Greek legend of Jason and the Argonauts, a story of a heroic voyage to the far edge of the known world to retrieve a magical golden fleece. Scholars have long noted that the route described, venturing into the treacherous waters of the Black Sea, aligns remarkably with the earliest evidence of Greek exploration and colonization in that region. The fantastical goal, the fleece, may symbolize the very real and immense wealth to be found there, perhaps in gold mined with sheepskins or in the rich trade for metals and other resources. The story preserves the cultural memory of a dangerous, pioneering journey into uncharted waters, a foundational moment for Greek maritime identity, wrapped in the guise of a quest. This phenomenon is not confined to the Mediterranean. On the opposite side of the globe, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia have maintained an unbroken tradition of oral history for tens of thousands of years. Their Dreamtime stories, which explain the creation of the land and its features, are increasingly being recognized as containing precise environmental data. Certain narratives describe coastlines and islands that were submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago. These are not vague recollections, but specific geographical descriptions that match what we know of the ancient landscape from geological surveys. They are, in effect, oral maps from a lost world, preserving a memory of the continent's shape from a time when the shoreline was miles farther out. These stories served a vital practical purpose, encoding navigation routes, water source locations, and seasonal patterns into a memorable narrative framework, ensuring survival knowledge was never lost. For every silent maritime power we have met, there is likely a myth that holds a piece of its story. The Polynesian tales of the great navigator Maui fishing up islands from the sea are poetic explanations of the discovery and settlement of the Pacific. The stories often include very real navigational clues, like the types of birds that signal land is near or the behavior of specific ocean currents. Similarly, the Norse sagas, written centuries later, are saturated with the maritime reality of their age, from the accurate descriptions of ship handling in a storm to the accounts of encountering unfamiliar peoples in Vinland, which align with the archaeological evidence of brief contact in Newfoundland. These legends serve as a cultural counterpoint to the silent archive. They tell us what these people valued enough to remember and retell. A story about a sea monster might encode the very real dangers of a specific whirlpool or reef. A tale of a voyage to an island of giants could memorialize an encounter with a physically distinct population. The fantastical elements are the embellishments that made the core truth unforgettable. Mining these stories for history requires a careful touch. We are not reading them as factual reports, but as emotional and experiential records. They tell us about fears, ambitions, and the sheer scale of the unknown these sailors faced. They preserve the sense of wonder and terror that came with sailing beyond the horizon, where the map ended and imagination began. When a written logbook dissolves, the legend often remains, a testament written not in ink, but in the collective imagination of a people who dared to cross the water and needed to explain how they did it and why. The hull of a ship is a language, its every curve and joint a sentence spoken to the sea. To understand the silent maritime empires, we must learn to read this language of wood, rope, and sail, for the vessel itself is their most honest and enduring manuscript. Its design is a direct response to a specific environment and a clear declaration of purpose. A broad, flat-bottomed barge built for a calm river speaks a different dialect than a sleek, deep-keeled longship forged for the open Atlantic. By tracing the evolution of shipbuilding technology, we can map the spread of ideas and the brilliant adaptations of cultures that left few other records. One of the most eloquent examples comes from the islands of Southeast Asia. Here, boat builders perfected a technique known as lashed lug construction. Instead of using nails or complex joinery, they would shape the hull planks so that integral lugs or protrusions remained on the inner surface. Holes were drilled through these lugs, and the entire hull was literally stitched together with flexible cords made from natural fibers, lashing each plank to the internal frame. This might sound fragile, but it was a stroke of genius for the conditions. The resulting hull was remarkably flexible, able to twist and give with the powerful swells of the Pacific without cracking apart, a perfect adaptation for long voyages across open ocean. This technological signature, found in ancient iconography and a few preserved wrecks, is a clear marker of the Austronesian expansion, a silent but undeniable record of their maritime reach written in the very structure of their canoes. Half a world away, in the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, another revolutionary technology changed the map: the lateen sail. Picture a tall, triangular sail mounted on a long, sloping yard. Unlike a simple square sail that primarily pushes a ship downwind, the lateen is an airfoil capable of capturing the wind from the side and even from slightly ahead. This gave the classic dhow, the workhorse of the Arabian and Swahili coast trade routes, an incredible ability to sail against the prevailing monsoon winds. A merchant could now make a round trip within a year, sailing south with the winter monsoon and returning north with the summer monsoon, instead of waiting months for the wind to reverse. The adoption and refinement of the lateen sail across the Indian Ocean world is a story of cultural exchange in itself, likely originating in the Arabian Peninsula and spreading to East Africa and India. Its presence on a shipwreck or in a mural is not just a detail, it is a chapter in a manual on how to master a specific sea. It tells us the builders understood complex aerodynamics and had a deep, cyclical relationship with the wind patterns that governed their economic lives. Every design choice is a solved problem. The Viking longship, with its iconic overlapping clinker-built planks and shallow draft, was engineered for lightning-fast raids and riverine penetration. It was a vessel of sudden arrival and departure. Conversely, the massive Chinese treasure ships of Admiral Zheng He's fleet in the 15th century, with their multiple watertight compartments and vast holds, were floating embassies and warehouses designed for prolonged, stable voyages to project imperial prestige and carry enormous quantities of tribute goods. We know of their staggering scale not from surviving ships, but from written specifications in Chinese records, a rare case where the document describes the technology. Their very existence speaks to a centralized state's ability to marshal resources for maritime glory. The technological lineage is a family tree of innovation. When we see a certain type of rudder or a specific mast-stepping technique appear in a new region, we are witnessing the diffusion of an idea, perhaps passed between shipwrights in a bustling port like Malacca or Hormuz. A shipwreck becomes a time capsule of this technological moment. The presence of both lashed lug planking and lateen sail rigging on a single vessel found in Indonesian waters would tell a powerful story of cultural fusion, a meeting of Pacific and Indian Ocean traditions. These silent wooden testaments allow us to chart not just where people sailed, but how they thought about the sea, what they feared, what they carried, and how they harnessed the wind and waves to write their history on the water itself. The silent witnesses are not only on the seafloor, but etched into the very land itself. A terraced hillside on a remote island or the geometric outline of an ancient dock can speak volumes about a society's connection to the ocean, revealing an economic blueprint written in soil and stone. This is the domain of landscape archaeology, where the subtle human modifications to an environment become the text we learn to read. The most telling clues are often the systems built not for glory, but for survival and trade, the practical infrastructure that powered a maritime economy long after its ledgers dissolved. Consider the famous stone platforms or ahu of Rapa Nui, which supported the island's iconic moai statues. For decades, the narrative focused solely on these enigmatic figures. But a broader look at the landscape tells a deeper story of a maritime people. The island is crisscrossed with ancient paths, roadways that likely transported the massive statues from the quarry to the coast. More telling are the remains of elaborate stone chicken coops and the evidence of sophisticated rock gardens, systems designed to maximize food production in a challenging environment. This landscape reveals a society that arrived by canoe and then had to innovate intensely to sustain a population, managing limited resources on an isolated island. Their entire world, from the quarry to the coastal platforms, was a testament to their origin as ocean voyagers who then turned their ingenuity inward. Elsewhere in the Pacific, the vast, intricate irrigation systems of ancient Hawaii tell a different kind of maritime story. These loi kolo or taro pond fields transformed entire valleys into lush, productive grids. This was not just farming, it was large-scale environmental engineering that generated surplus food. That surplus was the foundation of power. It fed the specialists, the canoe builders, the navigators, and the warriors who allowed Hawaiian chiefs to project influence across the channel between islands. The ability to grow and store vast quantities of food was a prerequisite for launching the long voyages that connected the archipelago, for staging the ceremonial gatherings that cemented political alliances, and for supporting a class of people who did not farm but instead worked on the sea. The agricultural landscape was in essence the fuel depot for a maritime society. On the coast of modern-day Gujarat in India, the ancient port city of Lothal presents a masterpiece of maritime infrastructure, all deciphered from the ground. Excavations revealed a massive, brick-lined dockyard, connected by a channel to the nearby river and the sea beyond. This was not a natural harbor, but a carefully engineered basin that could be filled and emptied with the tides, allowing ships to be serviced and loaded regardless of the water level. Nearby, archaeologists found the remains of warehouses, workshops for bead-making, and even a Persian Gulf-style seal. The entire layout of the city, from the dock's orientation to the placement of industrial areas, was designed around the rhythm of ships and cargo. Lothal's landscape is a frozen diagram of Indus Valley maritime trade from over 4,000 years ago, a physical manual of import and export that requires no translation. These terrestrial fingerprints extend to the very resources that made sailing possible. A maritime power's reach was limited by its access to timber. The search for tall, straight trees for masts and durable wood for hulls could dictate foreign policy and spur exploration. Deforestation patterns visible in soil cores or pollen records can sometimes be linked to intense shipbuilding periods. Similarly, the cultivation of specific trade goods reshaped landscapes. The spice gardens of the Maluku Islands, the sandalwood forests of Timor, or the cotton fields of pre-Columbian Peru were all agricultural choices driven by distant market demand. The land was cultivated to produce commodities that would travel by sea. Even the absence of structures can be revealing. A coastal area with rich fishing grounds but no permanent settlements might indicate a territory used seasonally by a maritime people based elsewhere, a landscape of extraction rather than habitation. By mapping these modifications from grand docks to subtle soil changes, archaeologists can reconstruct the scale and orientation of an economy. They can see which way a society faced, whether its wealth flowed from inland mines or coastal plantations, and how it organized itself to build, supply, and profit from the ships that were its lifeblood. The earth holds the imprints of their ambition, a silent ledger of timber cut, canals dug, and terraces built, all in the service of mastering the sea. A sweet potato grows in a Polynesian garden, its roots entwined with a mystery that spans an ocean. This humble tuber, native to the Andes Mountains of South America, was thriving across Pacific islands like Hawaii and Rapa Nui long before the first European explorers drew their maps. Its presence is a silent, living testament to a voyage we have no written record of, a profound biological handshake between worlds. This is the power of archaeobotany, the study of ancient plant remains, and its partner, archaeogenetics, which traces the lineage of both plants and animals. Together, they reveal a hidden layer of maritime history written not in words, but in DNA and pollen, mapping human connections through the silent, deliberate, and sometimes accidental exchange of life itself. The movement of species acts as an unerring compass, pointing to contact between cultures when all other evidence is ambiguous or lost. Take the case of the humble chicken. For a long time, it was believed chickens were introduced to Africa by Portuguese traders. However, genetic analysis of chicken bones found in East Africa tells a different, much older story. These bones carry a DNA signature that traces directly back to Southeast Asia, not Europe. Furthermore, radiocarbon dating places them on the continent as early as the 8th century, long before the Portuguese era. This creates a compelling picture. It suggests that chickens, likely carried on trading vessels as a source of fresh eggs and meat, made the journey across the Indian Ocean with Austronesian or Arab traders, becoming stowaways in a story of commerce and cultural exchange that written records of the time never thought to mention. These biological trails are multifaceted. Some species traveled as cherished cargo, intentional trade goods of immense value. The spread of the banana, originally from Southeast Asia, across Africa and into the Pacific, is a saga of agricultural exchange. Early mariners recognized its nutritional value and its ability to propagate easily from cuttings, making it an ideal plant to carry on long voyages. Wherever they established a settlement or a trading post, they could plant a familiar source of food, literally rooting their presence in a new land. The same is true for crops like taro and certain varieties of yam, whose genetic pathways across islands and continents chart the settlement routes and trade networks of the people who carried them. Other evidence comes from the realm of the accidental, the ecological footprint of a ship's visit. The unintentional introduction of rats is one of the most telling, if somber, signatures of human arrival on isolated islands. When archaeologists find the bones of the Pacific rat, which is not a strong swimmer, in the earliest layers of a settlement site on a remote island like New Zealand, it is near certain proof that the rats arrived as stowaways in the canoes of the first Polynesian explorers. Their presence becomes a biological timestamp, marking the moment of human contact and forever altering the island's ecosystem. Similarly, the seeds of weeds or plants from one continent, found preserved in the sediment of an ancient port on another, whisper of the contents of a ship's ballast or the fodder for its livestock, detailing a voyage through its incidental passengers. This form of evidence possesses a unique authority. A potsherd can be traded far from its origin, and a story can be embellished over generations, but a plant or an animal carries an undeniable truth in its genetic code. The sweet potato's journey from South America to Polynesia remains one of the greatest puzzles. Did Polynesian voyagers, the greatest navigators of their age, reach the coast of South America and return with this precious crop? Or did a single storm-blown raft from South America drift to a Polynesian island, carrying the tuber that would then be spread intentionally by the islanders? The genetic evidence is still being unraveled, but the simple, undeniable fact of the sweet potato's pre-Columbian presence across the Pacific stands as a silent, stubborn challenge to any notion of isolated worlds. It forces us to accept that the oceans were highways, not barriers, and that the web of connection was far more ancient and complex than our written histories can capture. By reading these biological signatures, we begin to see the full scope of the silent maritime world. We see not just the exchange of goods, but the exchange of entire ecosystems and foodways. A new crop could transform a society, providing food security and enabling population growth. The arrival of a new animal could change hunting practices and social structures. Each successful transplant, whether of a coconut palm or a breed of dog, represents a successful human relationship, a moment of contact, observation, and decision. It shows us that these sailors were not just traders or conquerors. They were curators of life, carefully selecting and transporting the species that would help them thrive in new lands or cement alliances with new peoples. Their most enduring legacies are often not in stone monuments, but in the gardens and fields that still feed their descendants, a living, growing archive of their incredible journeys. The ocean is not a barrier but a connective tissue. For a civilization born on its shores, this fundamental truth rewrites the very concept of identity. When your home is a ship and your horizon is the next landfall, your sense of self becomes fluid, shaped by the currents of encounter rather than the fixed stones of an ancestral homeland. This sea-based identity cultivates a psychology of perpetual motion, a mindset where the greatest threat is not invasion but stagnation. Why would such a culture pour its energy into carving its history onto temple walls when the most important story is the one being written with every voyage still to come? Their relationship with the past is practical, not monumental. History is the remembered route to a spice island, the genealogy that secures a trading partnership, the chant that names the stars for a return journey. It is a tool for future navigation, not a shrine to a finished past. This outward-looking focus breeds a profound adaptability. A merchant in a Srivijayan port must be ready to negotiate with a Tamil sailor one day and a Chinese official the next. A Polynesian navigator landing on a new island must quickly rid its resources and its people. This constant negotiation with the new makes rigid, inward-facing chronicles seem almost irrelevant. Their identity is performed, not archived. It is proven in the skill of the shipwright, the courage of the crew, and the fairness of the deal. Every successful voyage is a chapter added to a living reputation, a currency more valuable than gold in the next port. Their legacy was not meant to be read, it was meant to be experienced and extended. So we must shift our perspective entirely. The true monument of the Phoenician is not a library, but the alphabet spreading across the Mediterranean. The true chronicle of the Austronesian is not a written epic, but the family of languages spoken from Madagascar to Rapa Nui. The true archive of the Tuʻi Tonga is the kinship network that still connects islands across the sea. Their history is encoded in the very fabric of the present, in the mixed lineages of coastal populations, in the shared words for boat and wave, in the sailing technologies that were adopted and adapted from one sea to another. This is a living, breathing, evolving inheritance. It validates itself through continued existence and connection, not through the brittle authority of parchment locked in a vault. Their silence, then, is not an emptiness. It is the quiet confidence of a culture that wrote its name on the water, trusting that the ripples would touch shores they would never see, long after their ships had turned to coral and their names were forgotten by the land. Our own century is a paradox of permanent records and profound forgetting. We generate more data in a single day than many ancient civilizations did in their entire history, yet we may be constructing the most fragile archive ever conceived. The servers humming in climate-controlled buildings are our modern clay tablets, and the proprietary file formats we use are a new kind of undeciphered script. This raises a haunting question for future historians. Could our era, for all its digital noise, face its own form of silence, a digital dark age. Just as palm leaf manuscripts dissolved in tropical humidity, our hard drives will degrade, our cloud storage providers will go out of business, and the software needed to read a 21st century document may become as obsolete as linear A. The sheer volume of information could become its own tomb, a mountain of data so vast and inaccessible that it tells future archaeologists nothing at all about how we actually lived and connected. This new silence is not just accidental, it is often strategic. The global shipping lanes of today are monitored by satellites and guided by proprietary algorithms that calculate the most fuel-efficient routes in real time. The navigation charts of a modern container shipping company are not shared public knowledge. They are closely guarded trade secrets, a competitive advantage worth billions. The complex software that manages the world's supply chains, predicting demand and orchestrating the movement of millions of containers, is a black box of silent logic. In this sense, the mindset of the ancient Phoenician merchant, guarding his trade routes as the ultimate secret, is alive and well in the server farms of Copenhagen and Singapore. States, too, engage in this new silence. The routes of nuclear submarines or the details of underwater surveillance networks are the modern equivalent of Venetian state secrets, encrypted and hidden from view, creating deliberate gaps in the historical record that future scholars will struggle to fill. So what might a future archaeologist 2,000 years from now deduce about our global, maritime-dependent civilization if all our digital chatter vanished? They would likely begin with the physical infrastructure we have left behind, the colossal fingerprints of our age. They would study the staggering scale of automated container ports like Shanghai or Rotterdam, landscapes of steel cranes and concrete that speak of a world economy moving in standardized metal boxes. They would map the global network of undersea fiber optic cables, tracing their paths along the ocean floor and realizing these were the nervous system of our planet, carrying the digital pulses that replaced older forms of communication. The very design of our largest ships, the Megamax container vessels longer than the Empire State Building is tall, would tell them about our priorities, economies of scale, and our relentless drive to move more goods across the water for less cost. These physical remains would be our amphorae and our pottery shards. A stranded shipping container washed ashore on a remote beach would be a cultural artifact as telling as a Roman amphora. The plastic pollution gathering in ocean gyres might become a stratigraphic layer in the geological record, marking the Anthropocene as clearly as volcanic ash. The ruins of offshore oil platforms could be interpreted as ceremonial platforms or strange industrial temples to a forgotten god of energy. And just as we piece together ancient trade routes from scattered coin hoards, they might trace our global connections through the distribution of specific manufactured items, like the ubiquitous smartphone, found in archaeological layers from every continent. The parallel is profound. We are now the maritime power leaving a mixed legacy of overwhelming data and intentional secrecy. Our challenge mirrors the one we face with the silent sailors of the past, learning to read the language of infrastructure and the silent logic of systems. It prompts us to consider what we are choosing to preserve and what we are choosing to obscure. In an age of information abundance, what stories are we actually saving for the future, and what essential truths about our interconnected world might slip into the silent depths, becoming as mysterious to our descendants as the motives of a Srivijayan king or the star charts of a Polynesian navigator are to us? A single shard of pottery is a sentence without a verb. To hear its full story, we must place it beside a carbon-dated seed, a half-remembered word, and a star chart drawn in the sand. This is the historian's true craft, not reading a pre-written book, but assembling a coherent narrative from fragments scattered across continents and centuries. It is a creative, deductive process, a form of intellectual archaeology where the goal is to reconstruct an entire network from a handful of silent clues. Let us walk through how this works by attempting to reconstruct one of antiquity's most elusive trade highways, the legendary cinnamon route. Ancient Greek and Roman texts speak with awe of cinnamon, a precious spice that arrived from mysterious lands to the south. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century, expressed frustration that the true source was concealed by Arabian traders who spun tall tales about harvesting it from the nests of giant birds. For centuries, the origin was a guarded secret, a ghost on the map. Our puzzle pieces are scattered. First, the classical texts themselves, which point to a trade controlled by intermediaries in the Horn of Africa. Second, archaeological evidence from Sri Lanka, where excavations of ancient port sites have revealed not only evidence of local spice processing but also Roman coins and glassware, dating to exactly the right period. Third, we have the botanical fact that the true cinnamon tree, Cinnamomum verum, is native only to Sri Lanka. Fourth, linguistic clues, like the ancient Egyptian word for cinnamon, which may have roots in a Malaysian term, hinting at even older transoceanic trade layers. Fifth, and perhaps most telling, are the ships. The monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean create a predictable, seasonal highway. From December to March, the northeast monsoon would carry a ship from the ports of Sri Lanka or southern India directly to the Horn of Africa. From June to September, the southwest monsoon would blow it back. A merchant could make a round trip within a year, but he would need to wait months at each end for the wind to shift. This climatic logic provides the skeleton for the route. Now the synthesis begins. The Roman goods in Sri Lanka prove direct or indirect contact. The classical confusion about the spice's origin makes perfect sense if Arab or Somali merchants, acting as middlemen, deliberately obscured the true source to protect their lucrative monopoly. They would bring goods from the Mediterranean world to ports in Somalia or Yemen, exchange them for cinnamon that had arrived on the monsoon winds from Sri Lanka, and then transport the spice north, reaping enormous profits. The journey itself explains the scarcity and value, a voyage of several thousand miles dictated by the rigid calendar of the winds, with goods changing hands multiple times across cultural and linguistic barriers. Each handoff was a point where knowledge could be filtered, controlled, or lost. No single participant in this chain likely saw the entire picture from tree to table, which is why no one wrote a complete account. The historian's task is to become that omniscient observer, connecting the Sri Lankan excavation to the Somali coastal settlement, the Greek text to the monsoon chart. They take the silent artifact, the Roman coin found far from home, and give it a voice by asking what chain of events could possibly explain its presence in that specific patch of soil. This is not guesswork. It is building the most logical, evidence-supported bridge between known points. It means asking if the pottery style in an East African port matches anything from South India. It involves analyzing residue inside a ceramic jar from a Red Sea wreck to see if it once held cinnamon oil. Each new piece of data, from genetics to geology, is a potential missing puzzle piece. The process is a celebration of connective thinking. The absence of a written record is not a wall, it is an open door. It is an invitation to look at the world differently, to see a global puzzle with most of its pieces missing, and to find profound satisfaction in the slow, meticulous work of fitting a few of them together. The resulting picture is always provisional, a best explanation waiting for the next discovery to refine it. But in that tentative sketch of a cinnamon-laden how riding the monsoon, we recover more than a trade route. We recover a moment of human connection, a thread of desire and ingenuity that stretched across an ocean, written not in ink, but in the very wind that carried the scent of spice from one world to another. Their silence is not a void, but a chorus of different voices, our voyage across these forgotten seas ends with a simple, profound shift in perspective. The greatest libraries of these maritime empires were never built of stone or filled with scrolls. They were constructed from memory, from the grain of a ship's timber, and from the very currents they learned to ride. Their power was not proclaimed in royal decrees, but demonstrated in the quiet confidence of a navigator reading the swell, in the trust of a handshake sealing a deal across languages, and in the living network of kinship that stretched from one island horizon to the next. They teach us that history is not a single story written in ink, but a symphony of evidence playing across disciplines. A broken pot, a shared word, a strand of DNA, a terraced hillside, each is an instrument contributing to the melody of the past. To understand them, we must become fluent in more than one language of legacy. We must learn to read the map written in a constellation's path, the contract embedded in a ceremonial chant, and the treaty found in the distribution of a common pottery style. Their enduring challenge to us is to expand what we consider a valid document. A shipwreck is an archive, a family lineage is a historical text, a garden of transplanted crops is a living record of connection. These silent seafarers compel us to listen more carefully, to tune our ears to the whispers that come from beyond the page, from the soil, the sea, and the stories passed from elder to child. As we navigate our own increasingly complex and documented world, their example offers a timeless insight. True influence is not always about who shouts the loudest or who keeps the most meticulous records. Sometimes it is about who builds the most resilient networks, who masters the silent language of their environment, and who weaves their legacy so deeply into the fabric of the world that it continues to shape the future long after their names are forgotten. Their stories remind us that human achievement echoes through time in countless forms, and that sometimes the most powerful messages are the ones left unspoken, waiting for a curious mind to piece them together from the fragments they left upon the shore and the waves. If this journey into the world of silent empires has sparked your curiosity, consider subscribing for more explorations into history's greatest enigmas. We would love to hear which of these elusive seafarers captured your imagination most, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below.